A man in a flannel shirt walked into a luxury car auction, stood in front of the most damaged wreck on the lot, and paid $500 for it. The whole room laughed. The CEO laughed loudest. She had a microphone. She made sure everyone heard. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man wasn't lost. He wasn't desperate. He was the only person in that entire lot who could see what was actually sitting there, and what it was going to be worth. Stay with this, because what he did next, nobody in that room saw coming. The car sat at the far end of the auction lot, like something the world had already decided to forget. Its roof was caved on one side. The paint, what little remained, had blistered and peeled back in long strips, exposing raw metal underneath, dark with rust and age. Both rear tires were flat. The windshield wore a crack that ran corner to corner like a fault line waiting to split. No one had taken a photograph of it for the catalog. The lot number, 47, had been written by hand on a strip of masking tape and pressed crookedly to the bumper. Whoever prepared the listing had typed 4 words in the description field. Condition unknown, damage extensive. Nobody stopped to look at it twice. Nobody, except Lucas Merritt. He had been standing in front of it for 12 minutes. He knew because Cole had counted out loud, the way 7-year-olds do when they are bored and patient at the same time. Lucas had not moved. His hands were in the front pockets of his flannel shirt, and his eyes moved slowly across the car, not with the casual sweep of curiosity, but with the focused, deliberate attention of someone reading a language other people had forgotten. The auction had begun 2 hours earlier. Ashton Premier Motors hosted the event 4 times a year, and this particular Saturday morning had drawn the usual crowd dealers in pressed shirts, collectors with catalogs folded under their arms, a few young men pretending to know more than they did. The front rows of the lot were lined with the kind of cars that caught the light properly: a restored touring sedan from the 1950s, a pair of European sports coupes with matching interiors, a long black American muscle car that had been repainted so many times its original color was anyone's guess. Those cars sold fast, to people who already knew what they wanted before they arrived. Lucas had not come for those cars. He had spent the previous evening at his kitchen table, reading through the auction catalog on his laptop, while Cole drew pictures on the floor beside him. Most of the listings he skipped in under 3 seconds. Then he reached lot 47. No photograph, no vehicle identification number, no previous owner listed. Only those 4 words: condition unknown, damage extensive. Something in him went still. He marked it with a pencil circle and put Cole to bed. Now he stood in front of it, and the longer he looked, the quieter everything around him became. The body was low and long. The roofline had a particular slope, a specific pitch at the rear that belonged to a very short list of cars built during a very specific window of years. The rear quarter panels flared in a way that was not accidental. That kind of geometry cost money in the 1960s, and it was not copied cheaply. He crouched beside the driver's side door and looked at the gap between the fender and the hood. He stood and walked to the rear and studied the angle of the taillight housings beneath the grime. He pressed 2 fingers against the lower sill and felt the shape of the metal through the rust, the way a doctor presses a hand against a rib and knows what is underneath. Cole appeared at his elbow. "Is this one ours, Dad?" Lucas looked down at his son. The boy was holding a small die-cast toy car, a worn blue coupe he carried everywhere, its paint rubbed nearly smooth from years of handling, the same shape he reached for when he was nervous or tired or simply needed something solid in his hand. Lucas crouched to Cole's level. "What do you see?" Cole studied the wreck for a moment, head tilted, one eye slightly narrowed the way he always thought. Then he held up his toy. The roofline of the die-cast matched same pitch, same length, same quiet elegance under all the damage. "It looks like mine," Cole said. Lucas nodded once. He stood up and walked toward the auction table. The bidding on lot 47 opened with the auctioneer's voice carrying a tone of mild apology. He read the description flat, offered no encouragement, and paused for a long 5 seconds after the opening call. No hands went up. He called again. "Silence." Lucas raised his hand. $500. The auctioneer moved to close it quickly, the way people close a conversation they are not proud of. But before the gavel fell, something happened that would not have happened if the lot had sold quietly and without notice. A voice came from behind the rope line, where the VIP section was arranged a cluster of white chairs and a low table, the kind of area that existed to signal that some people were watching and others were merely present. The voice was clear, pitched perfectly to Carrie, and it belonged to Violet Ashton. "Congratulations." She spoke the word the way people speak it when they mean the opposite. "You just paid $500 for the most expensive pile of scrap metal in the parking lot." Laughter followed a handful of it, from the men seated near her, the kind of laughter that requires an audience to exist. Violet stood with a wireless microphone clipped to the lapel of her teal blazer, and she delivered the line with the ease of someone who had learned long ago that a room's attention is a tool like any other. Lucas did not turn around. He looked down at Cole. The boy had heard it. He was looking up at his father with his toy car pressed between both hands, and his face had gone very still. Lucas placed one hand on Cole's shoulder and kept it there. "We know what we're doing," Lucas said quietly. He said it only to his son. He walked to the registration table and signed the paperwork. He folded the receipt and slid it into his shirt pocket. Then he took Cole's hand and led him toward the exit to wait for the tow truck. Cole looked back once as they walked. He watched the men near the VIP section, still talking, still angled toward each other, the way people angle when something has amused them. Then he looked down at the blue toy in his hand and held it a little tighter. Violet Ashton had not always been good at reading rooms. She had learned it, the way she had learned most things under pressure, with the knowledge that failure had a particular set of consequences in her family. Her stepfather, Owen Hartley, had been chairman of the board at Ashton Premier Motors for 22 years before she was given the title of CEO at 30. He had not given it to her easily. He had given it to her the way a man gives someone a test by handing them something fragile and watching what they do with it. She was good at the job. She believed that. The numbers bore it out. The brand had grown under her leadership. The auction events had expanded into new markets. The inventory was more carefully curated than it had been under any of her predecessors. She had worked for it. She kept working for it. But some days the job looked different depending on who was watching. On the Saturday of the auction, Owen Hartley was seated 4 feet to her left in the VIP section, and she had been aware of his eyes since the event began. She had been aware of the way the catalog was printed, the way the tables were arranged, the way the right buyers were seated near the front. When Lot 47 had gone to a man in a flannel shirt who had brought his child to an auction, and when the room had given her a half-second of silence that felt like an opening, she had walked through it. She had not thought about the boy. She had already moved on when she saw him in her peripheral vision, Cole, standing with his toy car pressed between both palms, watching her with a child's unfiltered attention. She had continued talking. She had finished the event. Owen had placed a hand briefly on her shoulder as the crowd thinned, which was as close to approval as he ever came, and she had filed the sensation away and returned to work. The satisfaction lasted about 4 days. On a Wednesday evening, Diana Cho, her assistant, a quiet woman who had a gift for surfacing the things Violet preferred not to look at, set a folder on her desk. Inside was a transaction summary for the quarter's auction lots, flagged by an internal review. Lot 47 had been submitted by a third-party broker, operating under the name Reese Acquisitions Group. The principal of that company was Dominic Reese, a dealer Violet had worked with intermittently for several years, a man who was professionally charming in a way that made her occasionally uncomfortable without giving her anything specific to name. The file on Lot 47 was thin. No vehicle identification number in the submission. No previous title. No documentation of origin beyond a cover note describing the source as a private collection, details confidential by request of the owner. This was not impossible. Private sellers occasionally required discretion, but it was not standard procedure, and it had been processed through without the additional verification step that was supposed to catch exactly this kind of gap. Violet looked at the folder for a long time. A specialist publication had run a short item that same week. No company names, no accusations, only a paragraph, noting that several consignment vehicles of uncertain origin had been circulating through high-end auction channels in the western states. The piece had been forwarded to her by Owen with a single line appended. "Let me know when this is resolved." She called Dominic the next morning. He answered on the second ring and explained everything in the tone of a man who explains things for a living. The car had come from a private estate, he said. The owner had reasons for not appearing in the paperwork, entirely legal reasons, he added quickly. This kind of arrangement was not uncommon. He would be happy to provide additional documentation if it was truly necessary. Violet said she would let him know and hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she asked Diana to pull the signed purchase record from the auction. The buyer's name was Lucas Merritt. There was a phone number. She dialed it. He picked up on the third ring. She explained who she was, that she was following up on behalf of a third party who had expressed interest in the vehicle, and that there might be an offer available $2,000, 4 times the purchase price, if he was interested in reselling. There was a pause. Not a long one. "Thank you," Lucas said. "No." He hung up. Violet held the phone in her hand and looked at it for a moment, then set it face down on the desk. The garage behind Lucas's rented house was not much to look at from the outside. The doors needed paint, and one of the overhead panels rattled when a heavy truck passed on the street. But inside, it was something else. Tools were hung on pegboard in orderly rows. A parts washer sat in the corner, clean and functional. A steel workbench ran the length of the far wall, scarred with years of use, and covered in the kind of careful organization that develops when space is limited and work is serious. Fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling, and at night, with the overhead door closed and the lights on, the garage held a quality of concentration, an atmosphere that belonged entirely to work. Lucas had built it slowly. After his wife died, 4 years earlier, he had needed something to do with his hands in the hours after Cole was asleep. He had started with basic tools, added equipment as money allowed, taken on small jobs at first, brake work, fluid changes, and gradually, as word spread among neighbors and co-workers, more complex restorations. He still worked days at a commercial shop across town, a job that paid reliably and left his evenings free. The garage was something else. It was where he became the version of himself his father had trained. His father, Ray Merritt, had run a one-man restoration shop in a small Ohio town for 30 years. He had never been wealthy. He had never needed to be. What he had was knowledge, a deeply specific, manually acquired knowledge of American automotive history that he had transferred to his son the way some fathers transfer land, through presence, through repetition, through long hours of quiet work side by side. Ray had a saying he returned to often: "A car is just a record of every decision the people who built it made. Learn to read the decisions, and you learn to read the car." He had said it so many times that Lucas stopped hearing it as something his father was telling him and started hearing it as something he simply knew. Ray had died when Lucas was 26, leaving behind a set of wrenches, 3 worn reference manuals with his handwriting in the margins, and a way of seeing machines that Lucas had never been able to entirely separate from the way he saw everything else. On the night the tow truck delivered Lot 47, Lucas waited for Cole to fall asleep and then went to work. He started with a flashlight and his hands. He moved across every surface of the car, unhurried, pressing and feeling and cataloging. The frame had taken no significant structural damage. He checked the critical points at each corner, the welds along the rocker panels, the mounting geometry at the suspension towers. What looked like destruction from the outside was, underneath, mostly intact. The damage was real, but it was surface damage. It was the kind of damage that accumulates when something is neglected and not when something is broken. He found the first confirmation on the second night. He cleaned a section of the door jamb and found a small metal plate still riveted to the frame, a production tag, partially obscured under a layer of gray primer that someone had applied over the original paint. The tag carried a stamped sequence of numbers and letters that meant nothing to a casual eye and everything to someone with the right reference material. Lucas carried his father's manuals to the workbench and opened them under the overhead light. He read for 90 minutes. Then he sat down on a metal stool and looked at the car for a long time. Cole appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing one eye. He had come to check on his father the way children come to check on the people they depend on, not because anything was wrong, but because enough time had passed. "Do we know who it is yet, Dad?" Lucas looked at his son. "Starting to," he said. "Is it good?" Lucas turned back to the car. The overhead light fell across the battered body at a low angle, and the shadow it cast made the lines of the car visible in a way the damage normally obscured long and deliberate, drawn by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Yeah," Lucas said. "It's good." The work went on for weeks. He dismantled the car in a sequence, body panels removed carefully and stacked against the wall, labeled with masking tape and pencil. The engine came out on a Saturday, while Cole sat on a folding chair at the edge of the garage, eating crackers and narrating. The interior was stripped with the patience of someone who understood that the frame beneath had not been assembled carelessly, and could not be reassembled carelessly either. He found an obstacle in the third week, a slight deformation in the left A-pillar invisible from any normal angle, detectable only with measuring instruments and the specific suspicion he had developed from years of his father's teaching. The pillar had twisted, very slightly, during whatever incident had ended the car's active life. If it was left uncorrected, every alignment that followed would carry the error forward, and the car would never sit right. He had no hydraulic frame press. He solved the problem the way his father would have, with cables, anchor points, and incremental force applied over 4 consecutive nights. Cole brought him a glass of orange juice one morning, when Lucas had worked until the light outside changed from black to gray, and set it on the workbench without saying anything. Lucas drank it without looking away from the pillar. The engine block was another matter. He disassembled it completely, cleaned each component, measured tolerances against the specifications in his father's manuals, and replaced what needed replacing. The work was expensive for what he earned, and he made the purchases carefully, over several weeks, choosing his expenditures the way a man on a careful budget chooses everything, with the knowledge that nothing could be wasted. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the situation at Ashton Premier Motors was developing in the direction Violet had been afraid it would develop. A second industry publication ran a piece that mentioned auction irregularities in the Western luxury market. This time there were named sources, 2 former consignment clients who described purchasing vehicles with documentation gaps. Owen Hartley did not send this one with a note. He called. He said what he always said, in the tone he always used, calm, precise, and in possession of an implication he did not need to state directly. He trusted Violet to handle it. He was confident she would. He simply wanted to make sure she understood the timeline. Violet understood the timeline. She asked Diana to compile the complete submission file for every lot Dominic Reese had placed through their auctions in the past 4 years. There were 11 lots in total. 9 had complete documentation. 2 did not. Lot 47 was the more recent. She called Dominic again. This time his tone had shifted by a degree, still smooth, still practiced, but carrying the faint compression of a man who is beginning to understand that the room has changed. He suggested that if documentation was truly a concern, perhaps the matter could be handled quietly through a private arrangement. He used the word arrangement twice. Violet ended the call. She looked at the name on the purchase record again. Lucas Merritt. She dialed. This time no one answered. She did not leave a message. She deleted the number from her recent calls log. Then she sat back in her chair and stared at the framed company motto on the wall across from her desk, a line about integrity and provenance that her stepfather had commissioned in brushed metal letters when the office was renovated 3 years ago. She did not look at it for very long. The moment Lucas had been working toward arrived on a Thursday night, 10 weeks after the car had come through his garage door on the back of a tow truck. The engine was back in. The frame sat straight. Everything that could be replaced had been replaced, and everything that could be saved had been saved. Before he finished the bodywork, before he touched another can of paint, he needed to know whether the heart of the thing was still alive. He waited until Cole was in bed. Then he went out to the garage, pulled the door down, and sat alone with the car for a few minutes. He had a habit his father had passed on, the habit of sitting with a car before you started it for the first time after a rebuild. Not for any technical reason, just because the moment deserved a beat of silence before it was broken. He got up, knocked twice on the door to the house, and Cole appeared in 30 seconds, fully alert in the way children are at 10 o'clock when they know something important is about to happen. He was carrying his small stuffed bear, which he only brought when he was somewhere between excited and nervous. Lucas pointed to the folding chair in the corner. Cole went to it and sat and held the bear in his lap and said nothing. Lucas checked the fuel line one more time, the ignition wires, the battery connections. Then he opened the driver's door and sat behind the wheel for the first time. The seat was original, reupholstered but in the correct configuration. The steering wheel was in his hands. He adjusted the mirror, though there was nothing behind him but the pegboard on the garage wall. He put the key in and turned it. The first attempt produced a cough and silence. The second produced a cough and a shudder that ran through the floorboards. Lucas made one small adjustment to the fuel mixture and tried again. On the third turn, the engine caught and then held. A deep, low, rolling sound filled the garage, steady and even, with the particular quality of something that has mass and means it. Cole came off the folding chair without thinking about it. He walked to the front of the car and stood there with his bear hanging at his side, looking at the hood with his mouth slightly open. The sound kept going. Lucas sat behind the wheel and listened to it. Cole turned and looked at his father. He didn't say anything. He just grinned wide and unguarded and completely real. Lucas turned the key off. The garage went quiet. He sat for a moment in the silence that followed, and then got out and stood beside his son in front of the car. "Does it have a name yet?" Cole asked. "What do you think?" Cole looked at the car for a long moment. The paint was still unfinished, still gray primer, with bare metal showing through in places. But he tilted his head, the way he always tilted when he was arriving at something. "Blue," he said. "It's going to be blue." "Car isn't painted yet," Lucas said. "Doesn't matter. I know what color it is." Lucas looked at his son, then at the car. "Blue," he said. "Okay." He had reached out several weeks earlier to a user on a classic automobile forum, someone who operated under the name Garage Ghost 71, a figure known in a small circle of serious collectors as an authentication specialist of extraordinary accuracy. Lucas had sent photographs of the production tag, the stamped serial on the rear of the engine block, and 3 additional identifying marks he had uncovered during the disassembly process. He had waited. Garage Ghost 71 replied on a Thursday at 10:47 in the evening. The message was longer than Lucas had expected. He read it standing at the workbench with the phone in his hand. The car was one of 214 units produced in a special limited series during the final quarter of 1968. The series had been manufactured for a specific export program and had never appeared in standard production records. Most of the units had been lost to time, their specific identity absorbed into the broader population of similar vehicles. A small number had been tracked through the collector market. One had sold at Christie's auction house in 2019 for slightly under $110,000. That vehicle had disappeared during transport. A recovery claim had been filed with the National Classic Automobile Registry the following year and had remained open. Garage Ghost 71 ended his message with a question. "Are you certain of what you have?" Lucas typed back 3 words. "I'm certain now." He put the phone down and sat on the metal stool and looked at the car in the overhead light. The engine was back in. The frame sat straight. 3 weeks of bodywork remained. But everything that mattered was already there. Already verified the identity, the history, the quiet, accumulated fact of what this thing actually was. He had known his father would have laughed, not out of surprise, but out of a particular satisfaction that comes to people who have spent long enough paying attention to the world to recognize that it occasionally rewards the practice. Lucas's eyes went to the corner of the workbench, where a small round badge sat in a cleaned and labeled plastic sleeve, something he had found wedged beneath the seat track rail during the interior strip. A club emblem from a Western States Classic Automobile Association engraved on the back with the year 1971. Someone had loved this car enough to take it to club events. Someone had been proud of it. He thought about the car at Christie's in 2019. He thought about Dominic Reese's expression at the auction, the way the man had looked. Not amused, but relieved. When the lot closed and the room's attention moved on, he stayed in the garage until past midnight. Then he went inside, put himself to bed, and set his alarm for the morning. Cole had an art class. Breakfast needed to be made. He made the call to the National Classic Automobile Registry the following Monday. He gave them the vehicle identification number, the production code, the date and location of purchase, and his full legal name as the current owner. He explained that the vehicle had been purchased at a public auction through an established company and that all paperwork was in order. He did not accuse anyone of anything. He said only that he wanted the vehicle's history documented accurately and that he believed the registry's open recovery file from 2019 might be relevant. The registry representative took down the information and said processing typically required 10 business days. It took 6. The restoration was complete by the end of the 14th week. Lucas had chosen the original factory color, a deep cobalt blue that appeared in only one page of his father's reference manuals, listed under a 2-letter code that most readers would have skimmed past without recognition. He had mixed the paint himself, matching it against a chip he had found preserved beneath the door seal. 3 coats, hand-polished between each one. On a Saturday morning in late spring, he rolled the car backward out of the garage for the first time. The light hit it from the east, low and clear, and the color answered with a depth that stopped him where he stood. The body panels aligned perfectly. The chrome he had carefully rechromed reflected the tree line at the edge of the yard in one clean, unbroken band. The car sat on the driveway and looked exactly like what it was, something made very well, a long time ago, by people who knew what they were making and now returned to the state they had intended. An elderly neighbor, a man named Harold, who had lived across the street for 30 years and was not given to commentary, walked to the edge of his yard and stood there with his hands in his pockets. "I don't know what I'm looking at," Harold said, "but it's something." Cole came out of the house in his socks, stopped on the front step, and looked at the car for a full 10 seconds without speaking. Then he went back inside and returned with his blue die-cast toy. He stood the toy on the hood of the real car and looked at them side by side, small and large, worn and new, one hand painted by a factory in China and one painted by his father in a garage at night over the course of 3 weeks. "They're the same," Cole said. "Pretty close," Lucas said. Cole climbed into the passenger seat and placed the toy on the dashboard. He sat with his back straight and looked forward through the windshield and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Blue is bigger than I thought." "Most things are," Lucas said, "when you finally get inside them." He received the registry's response that same afternoon, an email, professional and restrained in its language, informing him that the vehicle identification had been cross-referenced with the open recovery claim filed in 2020. The registry's records indicated the original purchaser from the 2019 Christie's auction had never recovered the vehicle. Their office was initiating direct contact with all relevant parties to establish the current chain of title. They thanked Lucas for his cooperation and asked him to preserve all documentation related to the purchase. He printed the email and put it in a manila folder on the workbench. 2 days later, Violet Ashton received a call from the National Classic Automobile Registry's compliance office. She was in the middle of a review meeting when Diana appeared at the glass wall of the conference room and held up her phone with a look that Violet had learned to read over 3 years of working together, the look that meant, "This plank cannot wait." Violet excused herself and took the call in the corridor. The registry representative was careful and courteous and made clear that Ashton Premier Motors was not the subject of any allegation. They simply needed the company to provide whatever documentation it held for Lot 47 from the previous quarter's auction, as the vehicle's identification had intersected with an existing recovery inquiry. They thanked her for her time. Violet went back to the conference room, ended the meeting, and asked Diana to close the door when everyone was gone. She sat at the long table alone for 11 minutes. Then she said, out loud to no one, "Get me everything on Lot 47. The documentation confirmed what she had suspected, but not yet allowed herself to state directly. The submission from Reese Acquisitions Group contained a vehicle identification number that had been entered incorrectly, not in the way that errors occur by accident, but in the way errors are introduced when someone understands the system well enough to know exactly which character to change. The physical description in the submission did not match the car that had been towed to the auction lot. The discrepancy was deliberate and verifiable. She called Owen. He did not say he was surprised. He said he trusted her to ensure the company's cooperation was total and immediate. He said if the originating issue was traced back to a third-party broker acting without the company's knowledge, that was a very different matter from negligence on the part of the company itself. He said these things slowly and clearly, as he always did. Violet understood. She got Dominic's attorney on the phone instead of Dominic. The conversation was brief. Then she asked Diana for Lucas Merritt's home address. She drove herself. It was evening and the city was quiet, and she did not think about what she was going to say until she was parked in front of the small rented house with the detached garage and the light visible under the garage door. She sat in her car for a moment. Then she got out. She heard the faint sound of a radio through the garage wall before she knocked. He opened the side door wearing work pants and a gray shirt and looked at her without apparent surprise, the way people look at things they have been expecting without knowing they were expecting them. Violet told him about the registry call. She told him about the documentation discrepancy in the submission from Dominic Reese. She told him that the company's legal position depended in part on the transaction itself being verified as legitimate, which it was, she said. He had bought the car in a public auction, with paperwork, for a declared price. Whatever had happened upstream of that transaction was upstream. She stopped. Lucas stepped to the side of the doorway, and she could see the car behind him. Under the light, finished, blue, and absolutely still. She stopped talking entirely. She had seen thousands of cars. She had grown up around them, been educated in them, built a career evaluating them. She looked at the car in the garage and understood in a single, unnarrated moment what Lucas had seen in the wreck at the back of the auction lot, and what she, holding a microphone and performing for an audience, had completely failed to see. "Did you know what it was when you bought it?" she said. "I suspected," Lucas said. "I confirmed it about 2 weeks in. And you still called the registry?" "Of course." She was quiet for a moment. "You could have sold it privately. No one would have known." Lucas looked at her steadily. "Someone in Colorado would have known. The person who bought it in 2019. He paused. "And I would have known." A door opened at the back of the garage that connected to the house. Cole appeared in the gap, barefoot, in the careful way children enter rooms, where adults are having conversations they don't entirely understand. He looked at Violet, then at his father, then at the car. "Is she here to see Blue?" Cole asked. "She is," Lucas said. Cole looked at Violet with the direct attention of a child who has not yet learned to filter it. "It came out good," he said. "Dad fixed it." Violet looked at the boy for a moment. Then she looked at the car. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the register it had worn at the auction. No audience in it, no performance, just the plain, flat statement of something true. "Yes," she said. "He did." The matter involving Dominic Reese moved forward without Lucas's active participation. The registry and the attorneys for the original Colorado purchaser established the chain of custody through documentary evidence. The falsification in the submission record was traceable and specific. Dominic's company became the subject of a formal investigation. Ashton Premier Motors provided its full cooperation, and, because the documentation trail clearly showed the company had been supplied with false information by the broker, its legal exposure remained limited. Owen Hartley did not express gratitude openly, but he stopped calling with timelines. Lucas spoke once with the Colorado purchaser, a man named Walter, 78 years old, who had bought the car at Christie's because he had seen one identical to it in a showroom as a young man and had spent the better part of his adult life trying to find another. When Lucas told him the car had been fully restored to original specifications, Walter went quiet for so long that Lucas thought the call had dropped. Then Walter said, "You did what I never could have done, even if I'd had it all along." They arranged the transfer without lawyers. Walter's representative drove up with a transport truck on a Tuesday morning, earlier than expected, and Lucas was in the garage doing cleanup when he heard it pull into the street. Cole stood at the edge of the driveway with his blue toy car in both hands. He watched the car being loaded onto the transport platform, the blue bodywork catching the morning light one last time before it went up. He did not cry. He was the kind of boy who carried things inward, the way his father did, and processed them quietly. When the truck had turned the corner and the sound of it faded, Cole looked at the empty garage bay, the rectangle of slightly cleaner concrete where Blue had stood for 14 weeks, marked only by a faint oil stain and the outline of where the floor jack had rested. "Are you sad, Dad?" Cole asked. Lucas stood beside his son with one hand on the boy's shoulder. "A little," he said, "but I'm not sorry." Cole thought about this. "What's the difference?" Lucas looked down at him. "Being sorry means you wish you'd done something different. Being sad just means you knew it mattered." He paused. The right thing and the easy thing aren't always the same, but you still feel it when you do the right one. Cole turned this over for a moment the way he turned most things over, slowly, thoroughly. Then he nodded, the way he nodded when something registered and he chose not to question it further. The money Lucas received from Walter was enough to cover 2 full years of rent and purchase a professional-grade engine stand and a hydraulic lift he had been budgeting toward for longer than he liked to count. It was not a windfall. It was not a transformation. It was the specific and proportionate return of someone who had done skilled work with integrity and been compensated accordingly. He put most of it in an account he did not touch, except for the equipment. He received a call from Violet 8 days after the car left. She told him the company was restructuring its third-party submission process and adding a verification layer that should have been there from the start. She told him it had been noted internally, by which she meant by Owen, though she did not say so that the situation had not escalated further, because the vehicle had ended up with someone who had handled it properly. Then she said, if he ever had interest in working with Ashton Premier Motors in a consulting capacity evaluating vehicles, authenticating provenance, she would like to have that conversation. Not as an apology, not as an obligation, as a proposition based on demonstrated ability. Lucas said he would think about it. That's fair, she said, and she meant it. He hung up and stood in the garage with the new lift and the new stand and the tools arranged on the pegboard in their rows. The space was clean and orderly, the way it always was after a project concluded and before the next one began. The floor where Blue had stood was scrubbed, the oil stain pale and fading. The small club badge from 1971 sat in its labeled plastic sleeve on the workbench, next to the manila folder with the registry correspondence, next to his father's 3 reference manuals with their yellowed pages and their pencil annotations in the margins. He had kept the badge. He was not sure why, exactly, except that it seemed like a thing that should stay where the work had been done. Cole appeared in the connecting doorway. He was carrying his blue toy car, as he always did, but now he was holding it differently, extended outward, examining it, as though seeing it for the first time from the outside. "Dad," he said, "what's the next one?" Lucas looked at his son for a moment, then looked past him through the open garage door. The morning light was coming in from the east, the same direction it always came from, falling across the clean concrete floor and the empty space and the tools on the wall. "Don't know yet," Lucas said, "but we'll know it when we see it."